The laughter was the worst part. Not the words. Not even the way he had said them. Loud enough for every wolf in that hall to hear. Loud enough to echo off the stone arches and bounce back to her like something thrown. It was the laughter that came after. Bright, careless, almost delighted. As if her pain were entertainment. As if she were a jest the moon herself had told. Hazel stood in the center of the great hall of Ashvale Keep and felt the cold of the flagstone rise through the soles of her worn boots. The hearth behind her was burning. She could feel the heat at her back. But it did not reach her. Nothing reached her. She was already somewhere else inside herself, already retreating behind the part of her that knew how to be still when everything was falling apart. She had waited 3 years for this moment. 3 years of being the quiet one at the edge of banquets. 3 years of lowering her eyes when the betas passed and minding her words and folding herself into the smallest possible shape so she would not take up space that did not belong to her. 3 years of carrying the scent of an omega in a pack that treated the designation like a mild embarrassment, something to be managed, never celebrated. She had endured all of it with the particular discipline of someone who believed that patience was a form of loyalty, that if she was good enough, still enough, useful enough, the bond would be honored. His name was Rendell, Beta of Ashvale, second son of the Harwick bloodline, broad-shouldered and handsome in the way of men who have never been told no. He had dark auburn hair that he kept swept back from his face, and a smile that the other wolves in the pack treated like warmth, but that Hazel, now, standing in the ruin of this moment, recognized as something else entirely. Performance. Surface without depth. She had believed in that smile for 3 years. She did not anymore. "You want me to claim you?" He had repeated her words back to her, not as a question, but as something comic. He tilted his head, glanced sideways at the 3 betas standing near the far wall, his friends, always his witnesses, and then he laughed. "Hazel, you're an omega who can't even shift properly. Your wolf hasn't fully manifested in 23 years. What exactly did you think I was going to say?" She had not answered. She had stood very straight and looked at him and felt something crack quietly inside her chest. The way ice cracks on a river in early thaw. Not all at once, but in a long, thin fracture that runs from one edge to the other. "I thought," she said carefully, "that you had given me reason to believe the bond was mutual. I was kind to you." He shrugged, as if the distinction were obvious. "Kindness isn't a promise. Not to an omega." He paused. The smile shifted into something thinner. "Especially not to one like you. One like you." The words landed differently than he perhaps intended. Not as cruelty aimed at the heart, but as a door swinging open onto a room she had not known was there. A room where all the kindness and all the attention and all the careful conversations over the last 3 years were stored not as memories but as tools, as management. He had been managing her, keeping her cooperative, keeping her quiet. And she had called it courtship. The 3 betas by the far wall were no longer bothering to hide their amusement. One of them, a tall, pale-haired wolf named Corvin, who had always looked at her like she was furniture, covered his mouth with his fist and looked away. The gesture was not subtle. Hazel breathed through her nose, lavender and old stone, and the faint acrid smell of someone's tallow candle burning too low. She noted these things with the calm attention of someone who has decided that falling apart is not presently an option. She would not cry here. She would not raise her voice. She would not give the hall the spectacle it was clearly waiting for. "I see," she said. "I don't think you do." Rendell took a step toward her, not unkindly, which was somehow worse. "You've been useful to this pack, Hazel, truly. Your knowledge of herbcraft, your work in the healing quarters, none of that is nothing. But a bond?" He shook his head slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "That requires strength, compatible rank. An omega without a wolf isn't a partner. She's a liability. An omega without a wolf. as if she did not already know what she was, as if she had not spent every night of her life since her 16th year waiting for the shift that never fully came, the near shift. The healers called it, the half-transformation that left her caught between human and wolf, and fully neither. She could feel the creature inside her, always. A presence, warm and distant, like a fire burning in a room she could not enter. She knew it was there. It simply would not come when called. She had never spoken of this to Rendell as weakness. She had spoken of it once, in confidence, as truth. And now here it was, a blade he had drawn from a sheath she had not known he was carrying. "Thank you," she said, because she did not know what else to say that would not break something in her she needed to keep intact. She turned and walked toward the corridor that led to the eastern wing. Behind her, she heard him say something else. She could not make out the words through the ringing in her ears. And then the laughter came again, from more than one throat this time, and it followed her down the hall like a second shadow. She did not go to the healing quarters. She went instead to the small room above the still room that she had occupied for the past 2 years. The one with the window that looked out over the herb garden and the outer wall, with the narrow bed and the single wooden chest, and the shelf of dried bundles hanging from the low beam. Rosemary, thyme, yarrow, valerian root. She had hung them herself, and they smelled of the forest beyond the keep walls, which was the smell she associated with the last time she had been someone other than who she had become here. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her knees and breathed. Her mother had died when Hazel was 9. Her father, a low-ranking beta of a different pack entirely, one from the northern borderlands, had sent her here to Asheville at 14 to be apprenticed to the pack's healer, a woman named Mira, who had since gone to her rest. The arrangement had been formal, bloodless, transactional. The pack received a girl who could learn herbcraft and tending. Her father received fewer mouths to feed in a border territory perpetually on the edge of conflict. Hazel received something, a roof, a purpose, a place to be useful. She had made herself indispensable. That had been the strategy, quiet and unspoken, arrived at by instinct rather than plan. Be necessary, be capable, never be the reason for inconvenience. She had learned to set bones and draw fever and brew, sleeping drafts and catalog symptoms, with a precision that even the pack's senior warriors had come to respect, grudgingly, the way warriors respected anything that was not strength. And she had believed. She had genuinely believed that Rendell saw her. Not just the usefulness. Her. She pressed her fingers against her sternum now and felt the slight ache there that meant her wolf was restless. It happened sometimes. A pressure. A warmth. A sensation like something turning in a small space. He was wrong about you, she thought, directing the words inward, toward that presence she could never quite reach. I know you're there. The wolf did not answer. It never did, not in words. But the warmth shifted, and she imagined, she had always imagined, that it moved closer. She was still sitting there, not crying, not planning. Simply existing in the strange suspension of someone who has just survived something they had not expected to survive. When she heard the footsteps in the corridor outside, not the light step of a servant, not the measured pace of a guard on rotation. These were different, deliberate, heavy without being loud, the kind of steps that belong to someone who has never once in their life needed to announce themselves because the room always knew they were coming before the door opened. She turned toward the sound. And then, outside the window above the herb garden, something moved in the darkness beyond the outer wall. Something large and dark and utterly silent. And every nerve in her body went still. The wolf inside her chest, the one that never came when she called, pressed forward suddenly. Not shifting. Not transforming. Something older than that. something that recognized what was outside before she did. The footsteps stopped. A knock, quiet, unhurried, landed on her door. And Hazel, for reasons she could not have named with any precision, felt the hair rise along the back of her neck. She did not move immediately. The knock came again, not impatient, not demanding, simply present. The kind of knock that understood it would be answered and was willing to wait. Hazel stood, smoothed the front of her linen dress with both palms, and crossed the small room. She lifted the latch. The man in her doorway was not from Ashvale. She knew every wolf in this keep by scent and by sight, from the high-ranking betas who sat at Rendell's table to the youngest pups who ran errands through the corridors at dawn. This man belonged to none of those categories. He was tall, taller than the doorframe comfortably accommodated, so that he stood with the slight forward tilt of someone accustomed to low ceilings in places built for smaller men. His hair was dark and worn in thick braids pulled back from a face that was angular and still, with eyes the color of deep winter water, blue so pale it was almost gray, sharp and entirely calm. A scar ran from just below his left cheekbone toward his jaw, old enough to be silver in the candlelight. He wore a tunic of dark leather with crossed straps at the chest, bracers on both forearms, and a manto of black fur at his shoulders that should have looked imposing, and somehow only looked natural, as if it were simply part of him, the way bark is part of a tree. At his side stood a guard, silent, armored, carrying a torch that threw warm light up the corridor wall. But the man in the doorway needed no torch. He seemed to carry his own kind of light, or perhaps its opposite. A gravity, a density, a quality of presence that made the space around him feel more real. "Hazel of Ashvale," he said. His voice was low and even. Not gentle, precisely. Careful. "I am she," she said, because she did not know what else to say, and because her mother had raised her to answer her name when it was called. "My name is Dominic." A pause, brief and deliberate. "King of the Lycan realm." The words arranged themselves in her mind slowly, like pieces of a thing she had to assemble before she could look at it whole. The Lycan King. Here, in the corridor outside her still room, knocking on her door. She had heard of him, of course. Everyone in every pack within the territories had heard of Dominic of the Lycan realm. He was spoken of in the way that storms and old forests were spoken of, as a fact of the world, something massive and indifferent that existed beyond the concerns of ordinary creatures. He had united 3 fractured territories under a single crown, without a prolonged war. He had ended the border conflicts in the eastern ranges that had bled smaller packs dry for a generation. He was said to be the largest Lycan to have walked the realm in 200 years, in both his human form and his wolf, and that his wolf, when it ran, turned the ground dark beneath its paws. She had imagined, in the abstract way that one imagines distant things, that he would be louder. That power of that magnitude would announce itself with noise. He was not loud. He was the quietest thing she had encountered in a very long time. "My lord," she said carefully, stepping back from the door in the customary gesture of deference. "Forgive me. I was not informed of your presence in the keep." "No," he said. "You weren't." He did not move to enter. He remained in the doorway, which she realized after a moment was deliberate. He was waiting for her to invite him, not assuming the right. "I arrived this evening. I have business with Lord Harwick." A slight pause. "But I came here first." That stopped her. "Here," she repeated. "Here," he confirmed. She studied him for a moment, this impossible, still man in her doorway, and felt the wolf inside her chest press forward again, closer than it had come in years. Not with fear, with something that had no clean name. Recognition, perhaps, except that she had never seen him before in her life. "May I ask why?" she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not a smile, not quite. A slight change in the stillness, the way a surface of water changes when something moves beneath it. Because, he said, I passed through that hall an hour ago. I heard what was said to you. The warmth that had been holding her together since she'd walked away from Rendell's laughter shifted into something else. Something that had edges. She felt her jaw tighten. Then you heard a private matter that did not concern you, she said, and was surprised by how level her voice remained. I heard a beta speak to an omega the way a man speaks when he believes no one of consequence is listening. His voice did not change. It carried no heat. It was simply accurate, the way a blade is accurate. He was wrong about that. Hazel said nothing. She did not trust what might come out if she opened her mouth without care. I also heard, Dominic continued, what he said about your wolf. There it was. The thing she had been waiting for him to use. Everyone who knew used it eventually. She lifted her chin slightly. It is a known limitation, she said. It does not affect my work. It is not a limitation. She blinked. He said it without particular emphasis. Not to comfort her, not to argue, simply as a statement of fact that he clearly considered settled. As if what he was saying was not extraordinary at all. My lord, she said slowly, with respect, every healer and alpha who has examined me in the last 7 years has concluded that your wolf is dormant. He tilted his head slightly. Not absent, not broken. Dormant. There is a distinction, and the betas of Ashvale do not appear to have the knowledge to understand it. She stared at him. He looked back at her with those pale, steady eyes and waited, because she was beginning to understand, a man who was very comfortable with silence. What do you know of it? She asked finally. She meant to sound measured. She was not entirely certain she succeeded. I know that a Lycan wolf does not emerge on the same schedule as pack wolves, he said. I know that dormant wolves sometimes belong to bloodlines that have been suppressed, not by nature, but by circumstance, by designation, by years of being told to be smaller than they are. He paused. I also know that they tend to emerge under pressure, or under the right conditions. Something was happening in her chest that she did not have words for. The warmth she associated with the creature inside her had spread further than it had in years, down into her ribs, along her spine. Not painful, urgent. Why are you telling me this? She asked. He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was the same, low, unhurried, entirely deliberate. Because tomorrow morning, the Lord of Ashvale is presenting me with a list of eligible females from among his pack's unbonded members, he said. It is a political offering, traditional, expected. A pause. Your name is not on that list. She hadn't expected that. I'm aware, she said. I intend to add it. The silence that followed that statement was the loudest thing Hazel had heard all evening. You cannot be serious, she said. I am not a man who makes statements I do not mean. He said it simply, without affront. My lord. She pressed one hand flat against the doorframe to steady herself. I am an omega who cannot fully shift. I have no rank, no bloodline of standing, no political value to the Lycan crown. I am a healer's apprentice in a secondary keep in the Middle Territories. Whatever your reasons? My reasons, he said, with that slight shift of stillness again, are my own for now. I am not asking you to understand them tonight. I am asking you to be present in the Great Hall tomorrow morning, and to not refuse what I am about to do in front of Harwick and his court. She looked at him for a long time. Outside the window, the wind moved through the herb garden, carrying the smell of thyme and cold earth and pine from the forest beyond the wall. The wolf in her chest pressed closer still. And if I refuse? She asked. "Then I will honor your refusal," he said, without hesitation. "And I will leave, and nothing will change here." He meant it. She could hear it in the exactness of his words, in the absence of threat or persuasion behind them. He was not maneuvering her. He was simply telling her the truth and allowing her to decide. She had not been offered a genuine choice in a very long time. "I will be in the hall," she said finally. "I make no other promise." "That is enough," he said. He inclined his head. Not a small nod. A real bow, the kind one extends to an equal. And then he turned and walked back down the corridor with those same deliberate, unhurried steps, his guard falling into place beside him. Hazel closed her door. She stood with her back against it in the dark and pressed both hands over her sternum, where the wolf inside her was still moving, awake, alert, restless in a way it had never quite been before. "What are you doing?" she thought. The warmth shifted again, and this time she could have sworn it moved upward, toward her throat, like an answer that had not yet found its words. She did not sleep. She lay on her narrow bed with the wool blanket pulled to her chin and stared at the low beam above her, the one with the dried herbs hanging from it, casting thin shadows in the faint moonlight that came through the warped glass of the window. And thought about choices. She had made so few real ones in her life. Most of what she called decisions had been responses, reactions to circumstances that had already been shaped by others before she arrived in them. Coming to Ashvale had not been her choice. Becoming a healer had not been her choice, not entirely, though she had grown to love it. Waiting for Rendell had not been a choice so much as a slow accumulation of small hopes that she had mistaken, in the end, for intention. But tomorrow morning was different. Tomorrow morning she would walk into that hall and stand in a place she had not been invited to stand, and something would happen that she did not fully understand, and it would be because she had said yes. That was new. She rose before dawn, washed her face in the basin of cold water on the stand by the window, and braided her hair slowly and carefully, the long blonde plait she had worn since girlhood, because her mother had taught her to braid it, and the habit had survived everything else. She put on her better dress, the one of heavier linen with the leather belt at the waist, and her gray cloak, and she clasped it at the throat with the small bronze pin that had been Mira's. The old healer had left it to her, along with her books and her dried stores, and Hazel wore it on days when she needed to feel that she was more than what others had decided she was. She was in the corridor before the kitchen fires were fully lit. The great hall of Ashvale Keep smelled of wood smoke and tallow, and the faint, stale residue of last night's meal. The trestle tables had been pushed to the sides, and the central space cleared, which meant Harwick had known Dominic was coming, and had prepared the hall for a formal presentation. Tapestries of the Harwick bloodline, a running wolf on a field of deep red, hung on the stone walls. The high windows let in the gray light of early morning. Lord Harwick stood at the head of the room with his 2 senior betas at his shoulders. He was a heavy-set man with silver-streaked hair and the permanent expression of someone trying to appear more significant than he felt. Rendell stood to his father's right, dressed with unusual care in a tunic of dark wool and a short cloak of brushed fur. He looked well-rested and confident and utterly unprepared. The other females were already arranged along the left side of the hall, 6 of them, all from established beta families within the pack, all dressed in their finest. They had ribbons in their hair and careful stillness in their posture. They did not look at Hazel when she entered. She was not supposed to be there. She took a position at the far end of the line, near the wall, and folded her hands in front of her and waited. Rendell noticed her immediately. She watched his expression move through surprise, then confusion, then something that sharpened into affront. He leaned toward one of the betas beside him and said something too low to carry across the room. The beta glanced at her and then looked away. She kept her eyes forward. The doors at the far end of the hall opened. Dominic entered without ceremony or announcement, which was somehow more imposing than either. He wore the same dark leather he had worn last night, the black fur mantle across his shoulders, the bracers on his forearms. He was accompanied by 2 of his own guard, large men, both of them, with the build and the bearing of Lycans who had spent decades in service to a crown. But he walked ahead of them, unhurried, and the room reorganized itself around his arrival, the way a river reorganizes around a stone dropped into it. Hazel watched Lord Harwick straighten. She watched the betas beside him go still. She watched Rendel's jaw tighten very slightly, the way it did when he was recalibrating. Dominic crossed the hall and exchanged the formal greeting with Harwick, a brief clasp of forearms, the nod of equals meeting on unequal ground, because they both understood which of them held the greater power, and the ritual simply acknowledged what was already true. Then Harwick gestured toward the assembled females, with the slightly too broad smile of a man presenting goods he was proud of. "My Lord King," Harwick said, "as requested, the unbonded females of standing within our pack, each from a family of loyal service to Asheville." Dominic did not look at the line of women. He looked at Hazel. Not a glance. Not a quick assessment. He looked at her the way one looks at something one has been thinking about, directly and without apology, for the span of 2 full breaths. Then he turned to Harwick. "There is a woman absent from this presentation," he said. The room went very quiet. Harwick blinked. "My lord?" "Hazel of Ashevale." He said her name the same way he had said it last night, without ornament, as if it were simply true. "She is not in your line. She—" Harwick glanced toward the far end of the hall, where Hazel stood, and something moved across his face that was not quite surprise. "She is an Omega, my lord, of no particular bloodline. She serves as a healer's assistant. I did not think her an appropriate inclusion for a presentation of this. Bring her forward." The words were quiet. They were also not a request. Hazel walked forward before anyone else could move. She would not be escorted like something being delivered. She crossed the cleared floor of the hall herself, with her hands still folded in front of her and her spine straight, and she stopped 3 paces from Dominic and met his eyes. She heard Rendell make a small sound. Not words. Something closer to disbelief. Dominic looked at her for a moment. The pale blue of his eyes in the morning light was extraordinary. She had not fully registered it last night in the corridor, in the dark. Now it was simply there, clear and direct. "Lord Harwick," he said without looking away from her, "I will be direct. I have traveled through 7 pack territories in the last 4 weeks in search of a mate. I have reviewed bloodlines, rank assessments, and political alignments until the pages blurred." A pause. "None of it matters here." Harwick was very still. "My lord?" "This woman," Dominic said, "carries a Lycan bloodline, suppressed, dormant, but present." He tilted his head slightly toward Hazel. "Her wolf has not manifested fully because she has spent years in conditions that diminished rather than supported it. I recognized the scent the moment I arrived in this keep last evening. My wolf recognized it before I did. The silence in the hall was total. Hazel's heart was doing something complicated inside her chest. She kept her face still, because she had years of practice in keeping her face still. But she could feel the warmth of her wolf pressing forward with an urgency that was almost painful. Lycan bloodline. The words moved through her like something she had always known and never had language for. "That is—" Harwick cleared his throat. "That is a remarkable claim, my lord." "It is an accurate one." Dominic said it without heat, the way one states the direction of north. Then he turned fully to face Hazel, and the hall and the tapestries and the morning light seemed to contract around just the 2 of them. "I intend to mark her as my mate," he said, "with her consent, and in front of this court, so there is no ambiguity about what she is and what she is owed." "Mestia." From the right side of the room, Rendell's voice cut across the silence. "That is absurd." The words came out before he had clearly finished thinking them, which was, Hazel thought distantly, very like him. She cannot shift. She has no rank, no bloodline of any significance. She has been a healer's apprentice in this keep for 9 years, my lord, and she is Beta Rendell. Dominic said it quietly, and Rendell stopped. I know what you said to her last night, Dominic continued, still in that same low, even voice. I know the words you chose, and the audience you chose them in front of. I know the precise nature of your cruelty, and the fact that you intended it. He let that sit for a moment. I suggest you say nothing further. Rendell's face had gone a shade of red that moved quickly toward white. Dominic turned back to Hazel. His voice dropped lower, not private, but personal. I will not mark you against your will, he said. I will not mark you for politics, or to make a point, or to shame anyone in this room. I am asking you, plainly, if you will have me. Hazel looked at him. Behind her, she could feel the weight of the hall, the held breath of 6 women, 2 senior betas, a lord trying to calculate his position, and a man who had laughed at her pain the night before. She thought about the corridor. The knock. Dormant. Not absent. Not broken. She thought about the wolf in her chest, pressing forward, pressing forward, pressing forward. Yes, she said. The warmth inside her chest exploded upward, and then Dominic's hand came to her jaw, gentle, certain, nothing like force. And he tilted her head with the careful intention of someone who understood exactly what he was doing and what it would cost, and had chosen it anyway. The mark, when it came, was a brief pressure at the curve of her neck and shoulder, and then light. Not metaphorical light, actual light. Pale silver, pouring out from the point of contact, flooding her skin, running down her arms and spine and into her fingers. And the wolf inside her chest did not press forward anymore, because it was already here, already awake, already real. She heard Rendell make a sound she would think about for a very long time. The light did not fade quickly. It moved through her like warm water, finding every cold place she had carried for years. And there were many cold places. She was only now understanding how many. Filling them slowly, the way a fire fills a room that has been shut too long. She was aware of the hall around her, of the stone floor beneath her boots, and the smell of tallow smoke in the rafters. But all of it was distant, muffled, secondary to what was happening inside her own body. Her wolf was waking up. Not the tentative warmth she had always known, that presence like a fire in a room she could not enter. This was different. This was the door opening. This was something large and luminous, uncurling from a long sleep, stretching its awareness into every part of her she had believed was ordinary, and finding that nothing had ever been ordinary at all. She became aware, gradually, that she was still standing, that Dominic's hand had moved from her jaw to her shoulder, steadying her, that the silver light had dimmed to a faint glow along her skin, like the last of an ember before dark, that the hall was absolutely silent. She turned her head. Rendell was standing exactly where he had been. The color had drained from his face in a way that she had never seen before. Not anger, not calculation, not the performance of feeling that she had spent 3 years mistaking for the real thing. This was something raw. He was looking at her the way a man looks when the story he has been telling himself collapses in a single moment, and he is left with nothing to stand on. She felt no satisfaction in it. She had expected to. She felt instead something much quieter, a kind of distant recognition that his discomfort was real, that the shame of a man publicly revealed is a specific and unhappy thing, and that she did not need it. She had not done this to hurt him. She had done this because a man she did not know had knocked on her door in the dark and told her the truth, and then offered her a choice, and she had taken it. That was enough. Lord Harwick was speaking. She heard his voice as if through water, something formal, something accommodating. The practiced cadence of a lord who has spent a lifetime reshaping his position to fit whoever held the greater power in the room. She heard the words honored and unexpected, and of course, my Lord King, and understood without fully listening that Harwick had already decided to call this a gift rather than a disruption. Dominic guided her gently toward the door. His guard fell into place around them without a word, and then they were out of the hall and into the corridor, and the cold morning air of the passageway moved against her face, and she breathed it in, stone and old wood, and the faint distant smell of pine through the arrow slits, and felt the wolf inside her breathe it too, for the first time, with full lungs. "Are you steady?" Dominic asked. "I am not certain," she said honestly. Something moved in his expression that was not quite a smile, but occupied the same space. "That is a fair answer." He did not rush her. He stood beside her in the corridor while she gathered herself, and the fact that he did not fill the silence with reassurance or instruction or explanation made her trust him incrementally more. He seemed to understand that she needed the quiet, not the comfort. "The Lycan bloodline," she said finally, when the world had settled back into its proper dimensions. "You were certain of it." "I was." "How?" "Lycan blood has a scent," he said. "Distinct from pack wolf. Older. It carries differently. Most packs in the Middle Territories haven't had a Lycan in their bloodlines in 2 or 3 generations, and the designation healers don't test for it because they're not trained to recognize it." A pause. "Your father was from the northern borderlands." She turned to look at him. "The northern border packs were Lycan in origin," he said. "All of them. 300 years ago, before the territorial fractures, they were part of the Lycan realm. The bloodlines thinned through intermarriage and designation pressure, but they don't disappear." He met her eyes steadily. "They go dormant." She thought of her father, a man she barely remembered, tall, quiet, with light eyes and a way of going still that she had inherited and never understood the source of. He had sent her away at 14, and she had not heard from him since. She had not known whether he was living. "Is my father—" "I do not know his current state," Dominic said, "but I intend to find out. There is a registry of northern borderland bloodlines in the Lycan archive. Your name will be in it, once I add it. Your history will be reconstructible." He paused. "If you wish it to be." She pressed her fingers against the bronze clasp at her throat, Mira's pin, and felt the cool metal ground her. "I do not understand what you gain from this," she said, marking an unknown omega from a secondary keep. "The political value is, there is none. You could have chosen any of those women. Better alliances, better bloodlines by the measures that courts use." "Courts use poor measures," he said. "That is not an answer." He looked at her for a moment with those pale, still eyes, and she had the sense again that he was a man who chose his words with the same care that she chose her herbs, by specific property, by particular purpose, with no tolerance for approximation. "My wolf knew you before I did," he said finally. "I have learned not to argue with that. It has never been wrong." It was not the answer she had expected. It was not political or calculated or flattering. It was simply honest, and honesty, she was finding, had a texture that was easy to recognize when you had been starved of it long enough. "And the mark," she said, "it cannot be undone." "No," he said, "it cannot." A pause. "I would not have offered it if I intended to undo it." She nodded slowly. She was not afraid, which surprised her. She had expected fear, or at minimum the residue of fear, the kind that remains after the body has decided something before the mind has caught up. But the wolf inside her was calm now, settled, inhabiting her in a way that felt like relief more than anything else. "What happens now?" she asked. "We leave Ashvale today," he said. "I have business remaining in 3 more territories before I return to the capital." You will travel with me and my guard." He considered for a moment. "It will not be comfortable. The roads through the western reaches are poor in early autumn, and we travel quickly." "I have ridden poor roads," she said. "And I am a healer. If your men are injured on the road, I am more useful awake and capable than carried in a carriage." The stillness in his expression shifted again, that almost thing that was not quite a smile. "Then you'll ride." "Good." They walked together toward the eastern courtyard, where the horses were already being prepared. The hooves of Dominic's destrier loud on the cobblestones in the morning quiet. She had nothing to pack that would take long: her books, her dried stores, her instruments wrapped in cloth. The small things that constituted a life that had always been provisional, always arranged to be moved quickly if it needed to be. She had never acknowledged to herself before this moment that she had always lived as though she might need to leave. Perhaps she had always known she would. She was in the courtyard within the hour, her satchel over one shoulder and a saddlebag of medicinal stores lashed to the back of the gray mare that one of Dominic's guard had selected for her. The morning had brightened into a pale, clear autumn day, the kind that smelled of cold air and pine resin and the promise of frost before evening. Rendell was there. She had not expected him. He stood at the edge of the courtyard near the gate, not blocking her path, not positioned to confront, just present, watching. He had changed out of the fine tunic and looked more like himself in plainer wool, which somehow made him look younger. Less like the man who had laughed in the great hall, and more like the person he might have been before rank had taught him what he thought he was allowed. He said her name when she passed him. She stopped. She did not turn immediately. Then she did. "Hazel." His voice was different from last night. The performance was gone. What remained was not attractive exactly, but it was at least recognizable as something human. He stopped, looked at the ground, looked back at her. "What he said in there, about your bloodline, I did not know." "No," she agreed. "If I had—" "You would have treated me differently," she said. "I know." She held his gaze. "That is not a comfort, Rendell. That is the problem." He had no answer for that. She had not expected him to. She turned and walked to her horse. Dominic was already mounted, his destrier a massive black animal that stood a full hand taller than any horse in Ashvale's stable, dark as ink, breathing slow plumes of mist in the cold morning air. He watched her cross the courtyard. He did not comment on the exchange with Rendell. He had heard it. She was certain of that. And he had let her handle it herself, which was exactly right, and she noted that too. She mounted cleanly, settled into the saddle, adjusted the satchel strap across her chest. Dominic looked at her once, a brief and steady look that asked nothing and acknowledged everything. Then he turned his horse toward the gate. And Hazel followed him out of Ashvale Keep into the cold autumn morning, through the shadow of the gate arch, and into the light beyond it. While behind her the wooden doors swung closed with a sound like something ending. Not badly, not violently, simply finally. And she did not look back. The wolf in her chest moved like a river finding its course. The road west smelled of pine and cold mud, and the first suggestion of winter coming down from the northern ranges. Hazel rode beside Dominic's guard for the first hour, behind him, which gave her time to observe without being observed. Or so she thought, until she noticed that he checked the road behind them at intervals, and that every time he did, his gaze found her before it found anything else. Not possessively. The way a man checks on something he has accepted responsibility for, with the particular attention of someone who takes responsibility seriously. She filed that observation away with the others she was accumulating. They made good distance before midday. The road through the western reaches was exactly as he had warned. Uneven, rutted from autumn rains, passing through stretches of dense forest where the canopy closed overhead and reduced the light to a gray-green dimness that smelled of damp bark and leaf rot and old earth. She found she did not mind it. The wolf in her chest moved easily through the forest smells, alert and interested, cataloging each one with a precision she had never had before. She had always had a good sense of smell, better than most, which she had attributed to years of herb work. But this was different. This was layered, specific, deep. She could smell the horses ahead and behind her, and the leather of the saddles, and the iron of the guard's armor, and beneath all of it, at a distance that should have been too far, the particular scent of the man riding ahead of her. Dark wood. Clean, cold air. Something older underneath, like stone that has been warmed by sun and still holds the heat after dark. She looked away from him and focused on the road. They stopped at midday in a clearing where a shallow stream crossed under a stone bridge, and the guard dismounted to water the horses and eat from their packs. Dominic sat on the low wall of the bridge and studied a folded map, and Hazel took the opportunity to check the saddlebag of medicinal stores. Yarrow, woundwort, feverfew, a sealed pot of drawing salve, clean linen strips, with the efficient habit of a healer who does not wait for emergencies to prepare for them. One of the guards, a broad man with a cropped gray beard whose name she would learn was Aldrich, had been favoring his left arm since morning. She noticed it in the way he dismounted and in the angle of his shoulder when he reached for the water skin. "Give me your arm," she said. He looked at her with the mild wariness that large men sometimes direct at small women who speak to them without preamble. "My arm is fine, my lady." "It is not," she said. "You've been guarding it since we left Ashvale. Sit." A beat of silence. Then, from the bridge, without looking up from the map, Dominic said, "Sit, Aldrich." Aldrich sat. The shoulder was not broken. A deep bruise, she determined, with some swelling at the joint, likely from a fall or a blow taken recently. She packed it with cold mud from the stream bank wrapped in linen, which was not elegant but was effective, and told him to keep the arm low and still until they made camp. "You'll live," she said. "I never doubted it," he said, with the particular dry humor of a man who has been in pain all morning and is relieved to have it acknowledged. She was repacking the saddlebag when she felt Dominic's presence behind her. Not heard, not seen, simply felt, the way one feels a change in the air before weather turns. "You didn't ask him," he said. "You told him." "Asking invites refusal," she said, closing the bag's clasp. "Injured men refuse treatment because they believe stoicism is the same as strength. It isn't. It's just pain with better posture." A pause. Then quietly, that almost smile again. "You are going to be extraordinary in my court." She turned to look at him. He said it the same way he said everything, without performance, without flattery, as a statement of something he considered factual. It did not sound like a compliment. It sounded like an observation, which made it land differently than a compliment would have. "I haven't agreed to your court," she said. "You agreed to my mark," he said. "The court is considerably less significant." She had no answer for that, which was irritating, and also, she was finding, not entirely unpleasant. She turned back to the horse. They made camp that night at a way station, a stone structure maintained by the Lycan realm's border guard, 2 rooms with a hearth and a loft, surrounded by a low wall. The horses were stabled in the attached lean-to. The guard took the loft. Dominic took the outer room. He gave her the inner room without discussion, which contained a narrow bed with a clean blanket, a stand with a wash basin, and a small window that looked out at the trees. It was spare and cold, and the blanket smelled of wool and old lavender, and Hazel sat on the edge of the bed and felt, for the first time in a very long time, that the space she occupied was not contested. She slept better than she had in years. What followed were 8 days of road, camp, and the particular intimacy of traveling with someone in close quarters under no obligation to perform. She learned that Dominic rose before dawn and was usually already at the map or speaking quietly with Aldrich by the time she woke. She learned that he ate simply and without complaint, regardless of what was available. She learned that he did not fill silence with noise, and that this was not coldness. It was the specific quality of a man who was paying close attention to everything around him and did not need to narrate that attention to prove it was happening. She learned that he noticed things. He noticed when she was cold before she said so, and redirected the group toward shelter without making it a decision that required discussion. He noticed when the roads worsened, and the gray mare was favoring her front left, and he stopped the column and waited while Hazel checked the hoof, a small stone, easily removed, without a word about the delay. He noticed, on the fourth evening, that she had not eaten enough at midday, and that night when the camp meal was distributed, her portion was larger than the others without any visible instruction having been given. She did not comment on any of it, but she noticed that he noticed, and she stored each instance carefully, the way she stored herbs, labeled, ordered, to be returned to when needed. On the fifth evening, sitting near the fire while the guard slept, she told him about her father. She had not planned to. She had been speaking of the northern borderlands in the abstract, asking questions about the Lycan bloodlines, the archive he had mentioned, the registry. And then somehow she was speaking about the man himself, the quietness of him, the light eyes, the way he had told her she was going to a good place when he sent her away, and the way she had understood, even at 14, that this was a thing he was telling himself rather than her. "I was not angry at him," she said. "I understood the practical reasoning. I simply—" She stopped. "You simply never stopped waiting to hear that it had mattered to him," Dominic said. "That you had." She looked at the fire. "Yes." A long quiet. The wood shifted in the hearth, sending a small cascade of sparks upward. "There is a man in the northern borderlands registered in the Lycan archive as Edric of the Ashwood line," Dominic said. "I did not mention it before because I was not certain of the connection, but your coloring, your bone structure, the particular resonance of your bloodline—" He paused. "I believe he is your father's bloodline directly. When we reach the capital, I will send a messenger north." She kept her eyes on the fire for a long moment. Something moved in her chest that was neither the wolf nor the warmth, but simply her own feeling, unmixed and undisguised, the kind that arrives before you have time to moderate it. "Thank you," she said. She meant it in a way that included everything: the corridor, the mark, the shoulder, the meal, the fire, this. He received it the same way he received everything, steadily, without deflection, with the particular grace of a man who does not require gratitude, but understands what it costs to offer it. They arrived at the capital of the Lycan realm on the 9th day. Hazel had imagined it would be imposing. It was more than that. It was old, ancient in the way that certain places are ancient, where the stones themselves seem to carry memory, where the walls have absorbed enough time that they feel less like construction and more like geography. The great gate was carved with running wolves, the detail worn smooth by centuries of weather but still legible. Beyond it, the city rose in tiers up the hill toward the keep at its summit, and the keep was massive and dark and real, and the standard above it bore a black wolf on silver ground. The city knew Dominic had returned before they reached the gate. She could see it in the way people stopped and turned, in the quiet that spread through the street like water from a stone dropped in a still pool. But it was not a frightened quiet. It was the quiet of a place that has learned to trust the person returning to it. She rode beside him through the gate. He had moved her from the column's middle that morning without explanation, and she had understood without needing one. And she felt the city look at her. Not unkindly, with the particular attention that a place extends to something new that has arrived at its center and might belong there. The wolf in her chest was calm, present, fully, finally here. What came after was not simple or swift, because nothing real ever is. The court received her with a mixture of curiosity and calculation that she had expected and was not frightened by. She had spent 9 years being underestimated in a secondary keep. She knew how to move through rooms that had not yet decided what she was. She asked careful questions. She listened more than she spoke. She found the court healer, an old woman named Seraphine, sharp-eyed and exacting, and presented her herb lore with the direct confidence of someone who knows her knowledge is real. And Seraphine looked at her for a long moment and said, "You'll do." The messenger Dominic sent north returned within 3 weeks. Her father was alive. He was old now, and not well, living in a small settlement in the borderlands with a younger family he had made after her mother died. Children Hazel did not know, a life she had not been part of. The letter that came with the messenger was short and written in a careful hand, the hand of a man who had needed a long time to find words and was still not certain he had found the right ones. He wrote that he had sent her away because he had believed she would be safer in a pack than in the borderlands during the years of conflict. He wrote that he had told himself every year that he would send for her when things were settled. He wrote that things had never settled the way he had hoped, and that the years had moved faster than he had understood years could move. He wrote, "I know this is not enough. I do not know if you will want to see me. But I am here, if you decide that you do." She read the letter twice, alone, in the room that had become hers in the keep. A real room now, with tall windows and a hearth and shelves she had filled with her books and her stores. Then she put it down on the writing table and went to the window and looked out at the city below. She did not know yet what she would decide. She thought she might write back. She thought that might be enough for now, to let him know she had received his words and was still deciding what to do with them. That felt like the honest thing. Not forgiveness. Exactly. Not refusal. Something that left a door open while she stood at a careful distance from it. She was not ready to walk through it. She might be, eventually. That was its own kind of hope. Dominic found her there an hour later, standing at the window. He did not ask about the letter. He had placed no pressure on the outcome from the beginning, and he placed none now. He came to stand beside her at the window and looked out at the city below them. And she was aware of him the way she was always aware of him. That gravity, that particular warmth, the scent of dark wood and cold air that she had catalogued on the road, and that meant something different now than it had then. "He's alive," she said. "I know," he said quietly. "I don't know what I want to do about that yet." "You don't have to know yet." She looked at him. He was looking at the city, his profile still and clean against the gray afternoon light, the braids of his dark hair loose over his shoulder because he had come from his study and had not put them back. He looked, she thought, like himself. Simply and entirely himself, without performance or management or calculation. He always did. It was, she had come to understand, the thing she trusted most about him. "I want to ask you something," she said. He turned to look at her. "The night you came to my door in Ashvale," she said. "You told me your reasons were your own for the moment. You said that." She held his gaze. "I am not asking for politics or strategy. I am asking what it was, specifically, that made you knock." He was quiet for a moment. "I have ruled this realm for 11 years, he said. "I have sat in councils and negotiated territories and made decisions that moved thousands of lives. I have done all of it alone, because the person I was looking for was not in any of the places I was told to look." A pause. "When I walked into that hall in Asheville and heard what he said to you, and then I saw you walk away from it with your spine straight and your hands still and your face composed. Not because you were not hurting, but because you had decided that your pain was not his to witness." He stopped. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less steady. "I knew." She held his gaze for a long moment. The wolf in her chest was still. Not dormant, never dormant again. Simply at rest, the way a river is at rest, moving always, but without urgency, because it knows where it is going. "I was not easy on the road," she said. "No," he agreed. "I questioned everything." "You did." "I may continue to." "I am counting on it," he said. And this time, the thing that was not quite a smile moved all the way into one, brief, real, entirely unperformed, and she felt it like the first morning of thaw after a winter that has gone on too long. She reached out and took his hand. Not dramatically, simply. The way one takes hold of something one has decided to keep. He closed his fingers around hers with the same care he brought to everything. Deliberate, certain, without pressure. And they stood together at the window and looked out over the city of the Lycan realm as the afternoon light shifted toward evening and the lamps below began, one by one, to come on. In the months that followed, the remaining pieces arranged themselves with the particular logic of things that have been too long delayed and are finally free to fall into place. Rendell never rose above his station at Ashvale. Lord Harwick, recalibrated now to the reality of his pack's political position relative to the Lycan realm, quietly restructured the treatment of Omegas within the keep. Not from conscience, Hazel suspected, but from the practical understanding that the Lycan King's mate had come from among them, and that this fact had redrawn the map of consequence. It was not justice. It was the shadow of justice, which was sometimes all one could achieve from a distance, and she accepted it for what it was. Aldrich, whose shoulder she had packed with stream mud on the first day, became something like a loyal fixture in her orbit, appearing at doorways when she went to the city without escort. Never intrusive, always there. She learned that this was his particular form of regard, and she accepted it. Seraphine taught her 3 techniques she had not known, and she taught Seraphine 2 in return, and they developed a functional working relationship that was not warm, but was deeply respectful, which was, Hazel thought, more durable than warmth. Her wolf fully emerged for the first time on a cold night in the keep's inner courtyard, 6 weeks after their arrival. She did not plan it. She was standing alone in the cold air after a long evening in the council room where she had sat for the first time at the table beside Dominic while territorial disputes were presented and discussed and decided, and she had offered 2 observations that had changed the outcome of one of them, and the room had registered this with the particular quiet of a place reassessing what it had assumed. She had gone to the courtyard to breathe, and the wolf had simply come, white as birch bark in winter, larger than she had expected, with pale gold eyes that were entirely her own. She had stood there in the cold and looked at her own paws on the dark stone and felt something complete itself that she had not known was incomplete. Dominic had found her there. He had shifted beside her without a word, his wolf enormous and dark, black as the fur on his manto, steady as everything else about him. And they had run the inner yard together in the darkness, while the guards on the walls above politely looked elsewhere. And it had been the most uncomplicated joy she had felt in her entire life. She wrote to her father in the spring. A short letter. Careful. She did not offer more than she had yet. She told him she was alive and well, and living in the capital of the Lycan realm. She told him she had found her wolf. She told him that she understood, without full forgiveness yet, that he had made choices under pressure that were not about her value. She told him she was still deciding what she wanted, and that she would write again. She sealed the letter with her own seal, the one Dominic had commissioned for her when she became Luna of the Lycan realm, a white wolf on a field of gray, her own design, and she gave it to the messenger herself. And she watched him ride out through the gate, and she felt the weight of the letter leave her hands and move out into the world. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The ceremony that formally recognized her as Luna was held in the great hall of the Lycan capital on the first clear day of spring. when the light through the tall windows fell in long, pale lines across the stone floor, and the smell of new wood smoke and early herbs drifted in from the gardens below. The court assembled. The council stood. The guards lined the walls in their dark armor, and Hazel walked in alone, no escort, because she had asked for none, because she was done being delivered anywhere. In a gown of deep gray wool with silver thread at the collar and cuffs, her blonde braid pinned with a clasp of white wolf bone that Seraphine had given her that morning, with the closest thing to tenderness the old woman had ever directed at her. Dominic stood at the end of the hall. He was dressed formally for once. Dark tunic, silver clasp, the braids of his dark hair arranged and bound. And he watched her walk toward him with the same pale, steady gaze that had looked at her in the corridor of Ashvale Keep on the worst night of her life and seen something real. She stopped before him. The officiating elder spoke the words of the formal recognition. Old words in the old tongue, the cadence of them like water over stone. The hall was very quiet. Outside, a bird was singing somewhere in the garden below the windows, one clear, repeated note, and the sound of it was the only thing in the world that was not ceremony. At the end, Dominic took her hands in both of his. "Do you take this place?" the elder asked her. "Do you take this responsibility, this name, and this bond, freely and without condition?" She looked at Dominic. He looked at her. She thought of a girl of 14, put on a cart, and sent away. She thought of 9 years of making herself small enough not to cause trouble. She thought of a laugh echoing off stone arches. She thought of a knock on a door in the dark, and a voice that said her name as if it were simply true, and eyes the color of winter water that had looked at her when she was nothing, and seen something worth crossing a hall for. "Yes," she said, freely and without condition. His hands tightened around hers, gently, certainly, and the hall breathed out all at once, and the wolf inside her moved like light through still water, and she was no longer the girl who had waited to be chosen. She had chosen. That was the whole of the story, and the beginning of everything after it.